and unsurpassed, penetrating, and perfect Dharma is really met with even in 100,000 million kalpas, having it to see and listen to remember and accept. I vow to taste the truth of the Tathagata's words. Good morning.
Good morning.
This morning I'm going to continue talking about Genjo Koan. So we are up to lecture 10. The part I'm going to talk about, I'll read it to you, but I'm not going to do a line-by-line commentary of this. But here's the 2 paragraphs that I want to talk about today. The first one is, when Dharma does not fill your whole body and mind, you may assume it is already sufficient. When Dharma fills your body and mind, you understand that something is missing. For example, when you sail out in a boat to the middle of an ocean where no land is in sight and view the 4 directions, the ocean looks circular and does not look any other way. But the ocean is neither round nor square. Its features are infinite in variety. It is like a palace. It is like a jewel. It only looks circular as far as you can see at that time. All things are like this. Then Dogen continues. Though there are many features in the dusty world and the world beyond conditions, you see and understand only what your eye of practice can reach. In order to learn the nature of the myriad things, you must know that although they may look round or square, the other features of oceans and mountains are infinite in variety. Whole worlds are there. It is so not only around you, but also directly beneath your feet or in a drop of water. So that's the part that I'd like to talk about today. So Dogen starts out after the first couple of lines giving this example of being out in a boat. So this probably came to Dogen when he was on his way to China from Japan. He was out on the open sea. Might have been the first time in his life that he had had that experience. So being a Dharma student, he immediately translated his experience into an example of the Dharma. So he goes out in the middle of the ocean, and he got out far enough from the shore to be able to view the ocean as being in a circle without features. And I think most of us are aware of this phenomenon. It also happens in a large lake. So you see what he saw was this unbroken, smooth, circular horizon in the distance. So this is the time when he said in the first sentence, when the Dharma does not fill your whole body and mind. So this view, from a Dharmic point of view, if we're going to talk about this as a kind of doctrinal Dharmic point of view, is a glossed over big picture view of reality. It seems to present the totality, but actually, Dogen's saying, no, that's a limited view. So for example, we think that when we start practicing, we think that the goal of practice is to live in emptiness. Non-duality, that's the goal of practice. And actually, when we approach practice from that point of view, we are only seeing this limited view of the Dharma. We are only seeing the ocean as a circle, the horizon as a circle with no features. We think that we're having some kind of special experience and that that's the goal called enlightenment, to have these special experiences. We think when this experience happens that our whole body and mind, to quote Dogen, is full. And we think this because the experience itself is so intense. But actually, to think of this kind of experience as the goal of practice is incomplete. It's an incomplete understanding. This kind of experience gives us a really visceral and body experience of non-duality, but in and of itself, as the totality of the goal of Dharma practice, it is an incomplete understanding. It is not the goal. And it's not the goal because it's not incorporated with the messiness of your life. Our goal is to meet our life with wisdom, compassion, and skillful response. To meet life with wisdom, compassion, and a skillful response. That's the goal. That's the bodhisattva practice. So sometimes we read Dharmic texts on non-duality and we think that's it. And actually, that seems like a pretty good idea. It's as if we had transcended our mundane, daily, problematic life. And what's not to like about that, actually, to not have to be mucking around the weeds of our confusion, our difficulties with other people, etc. But from a practice point of view, it's just not enough. When we are immersed in daily life as practice, then we can never reach the end of our practice, which is why Gedogen says, when the Dharma fills your body and mind, you understand that something is missing, that we can never reach the end of this practice. When I was younger, before I started practicing Buddhism, I would go off and sit by myself and try to have transcendent experiences. And I remember a friend of mine said, she said, well, you know, you go off and do that, but you're actually a really angry person. And when I drive around with you in a car, you yell and scream at other drivers and you get really upset and say, you know, bad things. So what's the point of all this transcendent practice? Are you trying to, you know, I thought that the point of practice was to transcend reality. So this was more kind of an Indian practice. And you know, after she said that to me, I thought, that makes a lot of sense. And you know something, I'm going to stop trying to transcend practice, transcend my life. I'm going to actually just sink right into my life as it is. So that's when I started going to bars and dancing and carrying on and giving up the spiritual life. But it had a pull on me, and then I came back around. But there was this wisdom, I think, in this notion of, you know, take care of your anger, take care of the emotional side of your life, take care of the part that's not working. Don't try to transcend it. Don't try to get rid of it. So our practice is not about getting rid of the difficulties. It's about going into, Dogen says, you know, twining vines, he says. It's not about cutting off the problems. It's about going into and bringing about transformation. So here's another example of this. When we're first taught about the precepts, we're told the precepts are like, don't lie, don't steal, don't harbor ill will. They're very prescriptive. But the reality is that we can only use the precepts, these admonitions, as guidelines. It's really important to study these rules, but it's not enough. If we just go by these rules without any nuances, that's like being in the middle of the ocean and seeing the horizon as a circle around us. We have to discern in our own lives how to enact the precepts according to our current life situation. Then they become koans for us, questions about how do I live this life? They're not hard and fast rules. If we make them hard and fast rules, then we become rigid. We become judgmental. So is it true that you ever, you know, is truth always the same thing every time? Talking about the precepts here of not lying. Well, sometimes the truth is black and white. It's like talking about the reason fires had happened. It would be a lie to say that there were no fires. Sometimes the truth, though, is hard to understand, and we don't know what to say. We say, how do I respond to the suffering of these fires? Sometimes not being entirely truthful, as we see it, may be a more skillful action. How do we know? It's only our maturity as people, our wisdom in practice, our adherence to the Bodhisattva path as our guide that determines our understanding of a precept. So we only come to see this by seeing the particular outlines, the rocks and the beaches and the shore. This is Dogen saying the ocean is neither round nor square. Its features are infinite in variety. So Dogen's saying that when you realize this global round view is not enough or sufficient as practice, then you realize that the Dharma body fills your body and mind and that something is missing in your original understanding, which was deficient, but also something's missing in the sense that there's always something more. There's always something arising, presenting itself, engaging you. You begin to see all the ways that you have to make effort in practice. Practice is actually about entering the mud of our lives, not transcending our life. Practice happens on the shore, not in the middle of the ocean. So right now in our culture, many of us, especially white people, or in this conference that I went to, maybe more politically correct to say we are white bodies, people in white bodies, are looking at racial inequality and our place in that mandala. I would say that that's actually something that we're all engaged in. So at first, I want to talk about my own experience here. About this particular topic in relationship to what Dogen's saying. You know, the first experience that I can remember hearing about was about Rodney King, which happened in 1992 when he was beat up on the side of the road by the police. And then O.J. Simpson came along, his trial in 1995. And then I'm just picking 3 examples here, and then George Floyd in this year. So, you know, when O.J. Simpson happened, I viewed it through the lens of a white person, and I viewed it through the lens of being a feminist. And so what I saw was, a man who had murdered his wife from my point of view, and that this was abusive. It was a domestic abuse. And I was appalled that O.J. Simpson was let off in the trial. And I noticed that there were a lot of people, African-American people, who were very excited and happy about it. And I thought, how could they be excited and happy about this? This guy was guilty. But now, from my perspective of knowing more about this, about having more empathy and understanding through Rodney King, George Floyd, all of the other people, that Black people who have been detained by the police and killed or maimed. Now I understand that from the position of being African American in this country, O.J. Simpson's acquittal was a triumph of a kind of justice in which he had the money to hire the lawyers. They got him off. It was a kind of jubilation of finally the system works for us. Finally, we are able to be freed from this oppressive system that has systematic racism. So from that perspective now, I can look back on that and say, oh yeah, now I have a much better idea of what was happening at that time. Why can I see that different vision? because as I got closer to the shore now, as I get closer to the actuality of the experience of, as Dogen says earlier in Genjo Koan, he says, to carry the self forward is delusion. To always see everything from our point of view is delusion. To allow myriad things to come forth and meet us, to have empathy and open mind, and to perceive this, some aspect from the other person's point of view, frees us to have a different kind of response. It frees us to be more open in our understanding of what is actually happening. So he says, Dogen writes that the ocean of reality's presencing is not just this round, non-dualistic point of view, or even the square point of view, but yet the two of those things simultaneously have to function together. So this way that I would say that the examples I've just given are all maybe from this, well, they're not all from the perspective of the infinite and variety, because how is it that we're able to have this empathy and compassion for each other and to see each other's point of view? It's because of this non-dualistic aspect of practice. But you can see how the two have to go together. We have this way in which we function in the realm of non-duality. We function in no inherently existing self. The Heart Sutra says no eyes, no ears, no nose, but it's saying no inherently existing eyes, no inherently existing self. So this no inherently existing self means that I have the capacity to understand that my selfness as a human being is not different than the selfness of all other human beings, regardless of color, intelligence, disability, ability, any of these kinds of adjectives that we can use to describe each other as different. But the reality is, essentially, we are also at the same time, and perhaps even more so, the same. So this way in which we have to combine the two, we have to combine those two things together to find wisdom. So Dogen writes that the ocean of reality's presencing is not just round or non-dualistic or square. Dualistic, he says, they are infinite in variety. They are more complicated. These things in our lives are more complicated. These are the twining vines. Wisteria, the twining vines. Kato means complications. These complications that arise. So this round and square has to be understood together. This variety, complications, and oneness have to function together. So our life is both a state of complete interbeing with everything and ours and others' individuated particular self, ourselves, living a particular life. Both are true. Both happen together. You know, it's just like the example of how people want to dismiss Black Lives Matter by using the lens of the doctrine of emptiness as a global view by saying white lives matter. White lives matter may appear to include everything. We say it's round. It means that there's no difference. But then when we look at this from Dogen's teaching, we understand that this view is incomplete. This view may even be harmful. White Lives Matter, we know, is actually a racist slogan. It's actually a way of saying Black lives don't matter. No one's lives matter, but my understanding of my life, my keeping power. So there we have an example of where the doctrine of non-duality is being used as a sense of oppression rather than liberation. This is something, by the way, just in general, that I hear people say about Buddhist practice. They say, oh, the doctrine of emptiness is being used to oppress me. It's saying I shouldn't have problems. The doctrine of emptiness says, everything should be great. Everything should be one. How can you be angry with me? How can you be upset with me? We're all one. How can you have have your particular issues. You know, how can we talk about the importance of taking care of people's various needs and cultural, personal suffering? That's a misuse of the doctrine of emptiness. That is an incomplete view. We have to get closer. We have to talk with each other. We have to not dismiss our suffering and others by saying the ocean is circular. We must listen to the infinity of variety of experience, of suffering and healing. When you see this, when you understand our life, our practice from this point of view, you know that something is missing with this circular model, that nothing but the oneness model is an incomplete model. When we understand this, we start to really get into practice, real practice, because real practice happens in the middle of our messy, problematic life. That's why we say a lotus in muddy water. The lotus, the symbol of wisdom. This lotus the sustenance of the lotus comes up from the mud and the dirty water in which it sits. It is not separate from. Yes, it comes up above the water and blooms, but it is still of the water. It is not separate from the water. This is our practice. We are not separate from muddy water. Our theory of practice, our doctrinal understanding of what we're up to, is the foundation. It is how we investigate. It's the ballpark. It's the map of how we discern what is helpful, what is appropriate, what is inclusive. But the map is not the whole picture. We have to actually walk the path. You may understand the doctrine of emptiness to mean everything is one thing, but you do not understand that this one thing is also each and every thing manifesting. Each and everything is particular and requires that we include all of it. And this taking care of all of it is a really big koan. When emptiness is only about an experience of the self, it is about myself rejoining the big circle. And when it's about myriad things, it's about the whole of our life with other beings and persons functioning together. It is the transitional space between the big picture and the particular picture that we inhabit as bodhisattvas in training. This is our path as bodhisattvas, not to transcend reality. We say that the fully expressed bodhisattva path is to be in but not of. So the inness and the not ofness is not a separation. The not ofness just means that we can be patient at times that when we are having our buttons pushed. The not ofness means that we don't get sucked in a certain way that causes us to be so triggered that we can no longer respond with a kind of wisdom and compassion. That's what that means. It doesn't mean that you're an alien from another planet down here having some kind of disconnected view of these poor people who are struggling with their lives and you're all above it. That's not what the Bodhisattva path means. Avalokiteshvara hears the cries of the world and responds to the cries of the world. How can Avalokiteshvara do that? Only through actually understanding and being the suffering as well. Not in a way that sucks us in and incapacitates us, but in a way that generates wisdom and compassion. Finally, as human beings, Dogen says in this passage here about you can only see as far as the eye of practice can see. He says, though there are many features in the dusty world and the world beyond conditions, you see and understand only what your eye of practice can reach. So as human beings, we have a limited view. Our view is limited by our karma, our neurotic tendencies, our delusion, our likes, our dislikes, our selfishness, and even our physical sensory capacities. So when you consider all of these factors, it makes sense that we're missing a lot of what's going on around us. In the case of being out on the ocean, you can see what's on top of the ocean, but you can't see what's below the ocean. You can't see directly beneath the boat. You can't see the shoreline's intricacies. You can't see beyond the horizon. You can only see what your senses allow you to see in combination with what your mind can see. So our view is actually quite limited. This is true of almost everything we encounter. There is that, and yet there is this decisive pivot point of response of the koan. What? What is this? How? How do I respond? Even though we know that something is missing, we know that we must do and respond. We are always making response. But knowing something is missing is actually a good thing. We shouldn't feel defeated by it. It's actually a good thing. When we understand that, we become humble, we become open, we make inquiry, we ask, what is it? We want to work to avoid and disavow in ourselves pride, self-righteousness, a closed mind, and rigid beliefs. We are not omnipotent. We want to include the experiences of others. We welcome the infinite variety of life. We include the needs, joys, and sufferings of the others as well as the self. To allow myriad things to come forth is realization. We understand this life practice realization never stops being new. Moment after moment after moment after moment. This moment, this moment, this moment never stops challenging us to step up, to make our best effort. This is the Bodhisattva vow. Thank you very much. Okay, I'm trying to get myself going here. Well, do you have any comments? Why don't you just unmute yourself, Sue, and whomever wants to speak, and just go ahead and talk.
You mentioned early in your talk about reaching an end of practice. Can we ever reach an end to practice?
No. If we talk about reaching the end of practice, I think we're saying to ourselves, you know, the Fox koan, where the student asks the teacher, if you're enlightened, are you, affected by cause and effect? And the teacher said, no. How could that possibly be? Enlightenment is actually being affected by and responding to cause and effect. And then the answer to that koan is not being caught by things. Mm-hmm. So that not being caught by is this way in which we are able to continue to be skillful in the midst of our caughtness as human beings. But that's moment by moment by moment. That's why Dogen says, your realization is responding to myriad things, because myriad things mean that you're actually living your life in the moment. It isn't some kind of, you're not in a bubble. Realization is not about being in a bubble called emptiness or non-duality. Realization is interactive, interbeing, messy, challenging. And I've met a few famous teachers, and they have their problems, But maybe the difference is they don't let them get in the way of ministering. Don't let them get in the way of also interacting with you or other people and having a wise response.
Thank you.
Yeah, Vicki.
I just wanted to hear a little bit more about the conference. Sounds like it was stimulating, and wonder if you could say a little bit more about the focus of it.
I'll be happy to talk about the conference, but let me first see if there's any other questions about the lecture. Yeah, Eric.
Okay, thank you for the lecture, and it's nice to see everybody. When you said Dharma fills your body and mind, you understand that something's missing. That particular thing I always interpreted as lack, maybe like suffering or something like that. Something's missing. There's always going to be suffering. There's always going to be lack. Is that not a way to interpret it? Or?
Well, I think that's a way you can interpret it, but I don't think that's what Dogen meant. Okay. I think that he does say at the beginning of Genjo Koan, he says, and yet, in aversion we spread. And so in that way, there's this feeling of, yes, Dogen saying, yeah, there's suffering. And as a human being, we really struggle with that. I really think at this point in Genjo Koan, he may very well be talking about the pitfall of practice of thinking that emptiness is the primary goal of practice. That somehow functioning in an erroneous way of misunderstanding this. And that what happens for us is that if we think that that's the end game to practice, then we think that it is an end game. We think that there's some way in which we're filled up. He's saying, we're filled up at the beginning. He says, when Dharma does not fill your whole body and mind, you may assume it is already sufficient. So to me, what he's implying is that when Dharma doesn't fill your body and mind, you think that Dharma fills your body and mind. And that's a kind of, you're like a closed container at that point. You have some fixed view about what it is that's filling the Dharma is. But then he says, when the Dharma fills your body and mind, like when you're really open and when the Dharma really is just everything, is the Dharma coming forward to meet you, you understand that something is missing. So you understand that there's always something new. There's always something to fill up this whole body and mind that you thought was already full. So that's the way I understand that.
And I had one other thing I wanted to say. You mentioned being in and not of the world, and that's something I remember from Christianity. I think that was also attributed to Jesus. I'm not sure, in the Gospel somewhere, I think that he or you should be in and not of the world. I don't know if he was referring it to. I mean, I don't know if it's referring to the same point you were trying to make, but I just wanted to say.
Yeah, well, that's such a great phrase. I'm not surprised to hear that other folks like it too. I mean, it's very evocative, and it's also koan. Like, what does that mean? What does that mean? So yeah, that makes sense to me.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. I have two screens here. I'm not sure. Anybody on
I don't.
Steve?
Yeah.
Steve, you want to talk?
Yeah. Still, I'm sort of following up on Eric's question. I guess I'm still struggling with what does that mean to be of the world? I get the in the world part of it, the being on the shore, but of the world, like we are made of the world.
Oh, you mean you're kind of like, okay, so the phrase is, what's the phrase is to be in the world, but not of the world. So
Right.
I think that what that phrase is about is that, we're totally immersed in the world as a Saha world. We're not trying to get out of this world. We're not trying to, pop into some other reality.
Mm.
So we're not trying to transcend reality, and we're not trying to live in some kind of non-dual place of, no connection. But then the not of the world, I think that's the side where you say, not getting caught by this. So, this is high stage bodhisattva practice. Like Avalokiteshvara is in the world, right? Avalokiteshvara actually functions in the context, if we're thinking of that as a kind of archetype, is actually in the world. Maybe like Vimalakirti, right? Vimalakirti was not really a lay person. He was a very high stage bodhisattva. So that meant that he hung out in, the real world. He ran a business, and all this stuff. But he also had a room where millions of beings were able to hang out in this little closet that he was supposedly sick in. So there was this way in which, Vimalakirti also was like, he really kind of met people where they were. The whole beginning of the sutra is him chatting with these various arhats and things, although he was making life a little tough for them because he kept kind of telling them the right way to go. But anyway, the point I'm trying to get to is that he functioned in the world completely, and at the same time, he was able to respond in a way that was helpful. He was able to respond in this high level that really meant that he hadn't gotten caught in it, in that he felt and understood the suffering, but he wasn't caught in it. It's kind of like, if you go to therapy, so a therapist is in the world in the sense that they understand what it is to be a human being. Thank goodness, otherwise they couldn't do their job. But when you're actually in that room with them or Zooming with your therapist, you hope that they are not caught with you. Because if it's all about they're empathizing with you and you start to cry and they start to cry, that's not what you're paying them for. You want them to actually have some distance and to be able to respond to your problems in a way where they're not completely caught in them as well.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's what I think that's about.
Oh, that's really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Peg? Yes.
I heard you talk about this, that life is basically, life is a koan. It's almost like our existence is a koan, at every step there's discernment about how to live, how to respond, how to act, how to determine if something is not quite right or missing, and that we become humble. It requires a lot of attention to be, it feels like being on all the time. And maybe that's what being a bodhisattva is about, but it sounds like a lot of hard work.
Well,
is there any kind of letting go at times and just like, okay.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think it's both. Sometimes you're off, reading a murder mystery, You know, we went to Gampo Abbey, which is a monastery up in Nova Scotia that Pema Chodron was the director of at the time that we were there, and she was up there, and we were like, and we had just come from Tassajara, and you know, there was this kind of notion that spiritual people who were in monasteries never read, for example, murder mysteries or science fiction or did anything like that, ate chocolate or whatever. And we got to Gampo Abbey, and it came up, and we were so thrilled to find out that we were all reading murder mysteries. We were all, you know, reading this kind of stuff, and they call it dunzi. So dunzi is like those activities you engage in that are not harmful or anything, but they're kind of like also not productive in a certain way. But there's this way that we have to recharge ourselves. So we can't be on in the sense of constantly questioning and pushing ourselves 24/7. If we did that, we would be create aversion to the practice. But I think that it's important to remember our vow and to push ourselves, you know, to not be selfish, to push ourselves to ask, you know, what is this in difficult situations in particular? Because there's so much, you know, like for example, and I use this all the time, if you're driving around in your car and you're stopping at stop signs and slowing down at red, you know, and stopping at red lights, and you're letting people in and you're doing all of those things, and you're not even thinking about it, you're doing practice in which you are actually engaged in realized action. So there's a lot that we do that we don't have to spend a lot of time thinking about. So what we want of ourselves is that when you feel emotions arising, especially negative emotions that are feelings of aversion or feelings of difficulty in some way, we sit down and say, oh, okay, what's happening here? What is this? How is this? What is needed in this moment, not just for the other person, but also for yourself? What do I need to do? What is the most skillful thing? So those are the times when we really kind of have to bear down a little bit and do the tough work. But there are other times when we're kind of on automatic pilot, or the times when we need a break. That's just as much of the practice as anything else.
Do you think that now during these times with all these hard things going on that we're having to work harder to do all those things? I mean, we've got a lot of hard ways to deal with negative emotions, I think.
Yeah, I think it is harder right now. I just read a lecture by a woman named Mo Farrell, who's at the Chapel Hill Zen Center. And Mo was talking about she and her husband being together for like 48 years. And she was pointing out that, you know, when you're spending all your time together, cooped up in the house, and particularly recently with the fires where the air quality was bad, so we weren't outside. So we have COVID-19, you know, we've got the air quality from the fires. So even if we're not dealing with being evacuated or any of those kinds of things, and all of the stuff that's going on around us, we could get a little testy, you know, for no reason in particular that we could ascertain. But when we sit down and actually think about it, we think, oh yeah, I'm like kind of stressed here. And then we say, if we're living with a partner, say, like Jocko and I live together, so, you know, we would say to ourselves, you know, maybe I'm need to put a little effort into this, because there's more going on here than I can see. There's actually a lot that's going on here about being cooped up in the house and et cetera, et cetera. And I really want to be patient. I really want to be, you know, kind to each other. So it's like that. And I think all of us are under a lot of burden right now. There's a lot going on, a huge amount of stuff going on in our culture. There's all of the stuff that's going on around Black Lives Matter and people of color and all of those issues. There's the election that's coming up, which is quite stressful. There's being cooped up in our house. We have a pandemic going on. So far, there has not been a tsunami, and the sun is still shining. And for us around here, most of the time we have electricity. So, you know, it's like there's this way in which, goodness gracious, folks, this is interesting times. So let's be kind to each other. Yeah, Eric.
You were talking about being in the muck as being, that's the place between the one and the many. I mean, Dogen talks about leaping beyond.
Right.
That's a different sense than being in the muck, or is it? I'm not sure. I just wanted to ask you about that.
He says leaping beyond the many and the one.
Yeah, the one and the many, I think he says.
Okay.
Leaping clear of the many and the one.
Right. So if you leap clear of the many and the one, where do you end up?
In the muck, I guess.
Let's say in the present. Let's say in the present moment.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, Sue. Sue P.
Hi, Shinshu.
Hi.
When in the line, in aversion, weeds spread, I always took that to mean that weeds are spreading no matter what. And, you know, if you're going to be in aversion about it, you know, you're going to suffer more. But I'm thinking, you know, now that maybe it means that the aversion itself makes the weeds spread. What do you have to say about that?
Both. I think both are good ways to think about it. If we create aversion, which we all do, right? We all have likes and dislikes. So when aversion arises for us and we don't examine that aversion and we don't apply our practice to it, then we truly are caught in the weeds. But simultaneously, as human beings in the Saha world, there are weeds. And that we should not expect that there will not be any weeds.
So even if you're a great positive thinker and you know, think kindly toward everyone, you'll still have weeds.
Well, since I'm not that person who, you know, I wish I were the person who thought kindly of absolutely everybody and had no likes and dislikes. Well, if you really were that person, I suppose you wouldn't see any weeds, at least not in other people, but you might see them somewhere else.
Thanks.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Shinshu?
Yes, Randy.
Hi. Very good lecture. Thank you. I appreciate it. As a person who's been evacuated and still is not in my home, I just wanted to say that not being in a position to choose or to be in control of what I normally would be in control of has opened me up to see other possibilities, and it's an amazing time to practice. And I have been taken in by my daughter and her girlfriend with so much love and caring. I'm in a room right now with a door closed that I'm using as my own. There's just so much here, and it's, you know, some of it is frustrating. I'm still living out of suitcases, and I can't choose what I want, but and my home is safe, I've heard. But there's so much, I can see myself in ways that I couldn't when I was more in control. And I just heard yesterday that I could go back to my house, but there's no electricity, phone, internet, or water. And fires tend to spring up spontaneously. And you should call 911 if that happens, but there's no phone and there's no water to put it out with, you know. So my daughter said, of course you're going to stay here. You're not going back to that. So this is just such a time that is ripe for practice. It's just amazing. And the practice period coming up could not be in a better time.
Well, and you know, what you're talking about is gratitude.
Yes.
This way in
Oh,
which
you're
you
right.
are choosing, because it's a choice, Randy. Although I would say that you have a tendency to go towards gratitude. There's this, you know, this way of, although weeds spread and weeds come up for you, you know, but they have a certain perspective that is brought about through the gratitude of all the other things that are going on simultaneously. So, you know, this is a practice of, and I don't even think at this point in your life about this particular thing. I don't think that you're saying to yourself, oh, this is my practice. I need to cultivate gratitude. I think you sincerely feel gratitude. So
do.
here's an example of where for you right now in this situation, you're not having to work at it. You know, there might be other situations where we do have to work at cultivating gratitude, where we might have to say to ourselves, okay, is there another way that I can look at what's going on in my life? Not in a way that denies the difficulties. You're not denying the difficulties of what is going on for you. And yet simultaneously, you're also focusing on the gratitude that you're feeling around you. And it's a really wonderful situation for you because you can do that in a really healthy way, you know, because you're safe and all those things that are going on. Sometimes it's a lot more difficult. And so thank you, you know, and thanks to your daughter and her partner,
Oh, yes.
their generosity and willingness to, you know, open their house. Because sometimes just because they're your relatives doesn't mean they're, you know, going to come forward in that way.
Right.
So, yeah, thank you, Randy.
Thank you.
Yes, Renee.
Thank you so much. That was a great talk. So there's that essential experience of emptiness seems to be really important to get to that point you're making. And I feel like that, for example, gratitude might not be something one has to work on if one returns to that essential feeling of emptiness, because then that connection springs right up and we don't have to, you know, just work on stuff anymore. It's just then that natural function of our humanness just happens. Is that something you would?
Well, yes, I think that's absolutely true. And I think that it's also a subtle understanding of emptiness, that it's a more difficult thing to make that connection. Yes, I mean, the fact that the doctrine of emptiness is referring to everything being completely interconnected and dependent upon everything else for its fruition, for life, you know, is gratitude, cultivates gratitude. I would say a way to talk about that is, you know, of course, emptiness and compassion are not difficult. I mean, are not different from each other. Sometimes they are difficult. They are different from each other, and they actually are like, they keep each other going, because those three pillars of emptiness, compassion, and skillful means are all exactly the same thing. They're talking about exactly the same phenomena. But we divide them up because it helps us understand in a more deep way. So yes, the doctrine of no inherently existing anything, self, whatever, is gratitude, does cultivate gratitude. But for us as human beings, it's really hard. And our misunderstanding of the doctrine of emptiness is that somehow it's a woo-woo experience. And it is true that we have Kensho and Satori. We have these experiences of oneness. And they're really important because they help us have a really non-intellectual, visible experience of this idea of oneness with everything. Yet, at the same time, what are you doing at the supermarket? What are you doing when you're driving your car? What are you going to do when you're dealing with your partner and you're upset, or a friend or an enemy, or all of those things? That's really what the practice is about. The story experiences are things that give us faith, encourage us, etc. And maybe there are, I would say high stage bodhisattvas are able to experience the doctrine, this kind of Satori experience in action, in which they're at the supermarket, they're having this experience, and yet they're totally functional, completely engaged with everything that's happening. But for most of us, when we have these experiences, in some ways they separate us because we're not very functional. We're gaga, and gaga doesn't work at the supermarket. So, I think that's where we're going towards. Yeah, I'm going to change back to the first screen because I can't see everybody. I'm not quite sure whether it's anybody. Of course, you don't know what my first screen is, but anyway, any other thoughts, questions? I go back to my other screen here. Okay, is everybody done? Okay. I'm going to ask Jaku to come back in here, and then she and I can talk about the conference if you would like to hear about the conference.
Wait, I have a question now. It took me a minute to formulate it. Hi,
Okay.
Shinshu. Thank you for your lecture. So we see and understand only as far as our eye of practice can reach.
Right.
How do we not want to be something other because we're aware that our practice view is a limited view? How do we not get caught up in, I must be missing something, or I'm less than because I know my eye of practice isn't reaching far enough, or I know that I can't see the whole. I know that, I look sometimes and the shore looks round and I know it's not, but how do we not get caught up on ourself? Do you see what I'm asking?
Yeah, you're asking. I think about being a white person, caring about people of color, and realizing that white people are traditionally oppressors in our culture. And I absolutely am aware of the fact that my eye of practice, that my experience cannot see the experience of what it is to be a person of color, right?
Right.
Because I'm not. I am a lesbian, and I know what it's like to be discriminated against as a lesbian. And I have been in Japan with Jaku. We were discriminated against as white people and not served in a restaurant. Okay, so that's a really limited experience on my part. I don't have that experience every day, and I can pass. But the fact that I know that I have this limited experience, and the eye of myself as a white person can only see as far as my eye of myself can see, I think asks of us in this situation to be open and curious and to be a student, right? Whatever that means. And that's what that means for us in this situation. And if we're in a situation where we're with somebody that we don't like, and we say to ourselves, I cannot see the karma in this person's past and their life. I just know they're doing something that drives me nuts. If I open myself up and say, I know I can't see this, but maybe there's something here, I think it makes us humble. I think it makes us more open and willing and patient and compassionate and wise that we engage in that way. Now, if we shouldn't take this as a downer, we shouldn't take it as a, oh my God, I'm never going to get there kind of feeling. It's just a fact.
I really appreciate you using the word curious. That was liberating.
You know, Pema Chodron used to say that, and she probably got it from Trungpa Rinpoche.
Mhm.
Spaciousness, curiosity. Curiosity and spaciousness.
I didn't think about it that way. Curiosity is actually an act of compassion. Because
Yes,
it's actually being compassionate toward yourself as well as the person you're trying to understand or the situation you're trying to understand. Thank
Yeah.
you for that. That's really helpful.
and when we know we don't know everything, then we can shut up and listen.
Yeah, as my former teacher used to say, sit down, keep your hands to yourself, and shut your mouth.
Right. That's
That
right.
was Rabina, Sue. Thank you, Shinshu.
Okay. Anything else? Da, 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 da. Okay, here comes Jaku. We're going to talk about the conference. Yeah, the SCBA conference. If you don't, if you don't care about this stuff, feel free to wink out.
Well, actually,
Oh wait, maybe we should do cute. Should we do the?
there's two things we need to do, the
Okay.
closing chant and I need to talk to people.
Closing
about the
chant.
I need to talk to people about the practice.
Okay, never mind. We have a different agenda.
Well, we have an adjusted agenda.
We have an adjusted agenda. Okay, so let's do the closing chant. I'm sorry, I forgot that. Very bad priest, very bad priest. Okay. May our intention equally extend to every being and place with the true merit of Buddha's way. Beings are numberless. I vow to save them. Illusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. Buddha's way is unsurpassable. I vow to become it. I'm just going to turn it over to you.
I'd actually stay for a second. Oh, okay. Hi, everybody. I'm going to scoot a little closer here. So two things. No, one thing. Two things. The practice period on the Eihei Kosu Hotsugoman. The class is starting on Wednesday night. So I'm going to ask my dear partner Shinshu to help me by sending out a copy of the Eihei Kosu Hotsugoman to everyone. If you're in the practice period or not, you'll get it. I have a confession to make. I asked everybody to please send me an email saying they wanted to be in the practice period, and I dutifully read all of them. But what I didn't do was track everything. So things have been a wee bit busy. What we have to do is sort out the link for the class and how we're going to get that to you.
We can use the same link, But I was just concerned that somebody might decide to, as experimentally from the website, to click on this link some night and break into the class. So I think that it would be better to just have a separate link, which we can send out. But you need to make sure Jaku knows that. Do you just want to send it out to everybody?
I think we just have to send it out.
Okay.
I do apologize. I just didn't have the time to track everybody's name and write down everybody's name and email. And I'm afraid that if we don't send it out to everybody, I might miss some wonderful person that wrote me and said, yes, I want to be in the practice period. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, great. So we will send out the Eihei Kosu Hotsugaman today or tomorrow. And I'd like to ask those of you that are in the practice period to please read it. Actually, everybody please read it, but if you're in the practice period, please read it. And then we'll have class discussion on Wednesday night. The way I envision this is that this emphasis is on discussion. So I'll have a few things to say, but I really want us to explore the nature of vow together. And then over the next 4 weeks, I'll be giving talks on each, I kind of divided the Eihei Kosu Hotsugaman up into 4 sections. So I'll talk a little bit about the history, little tiny bit about the history, and then kind of discuss the text. So that's what we're going to do. And I know that Ron has sent out an email that he's going to be doing contemplative walks. Thank you very much, Ron. And I really encourage everybody to join in that as a part of the practice period. And I have heard from some of you about what your plans are, and I really think they sound wonderful. And if you have any questions or you want to engage with me about any of this, please do let me know. I'm happy to do that. This next week is the first week of the semester, so it's somewhat nuts. I kind of don't believe that I did this this time of year, but anyway, I'm very excited about it. I'm really looking forward to studying this with you. So that's what I have to say about the practice period. Any questions about that? If you,
Thank you.
yeah.
Even though it's a tough time of year for you, thank you for your selfless gift.
Oh, it's not selfish. This is good stuff. I like it. Okay, so I'm just sorry that I haven't been as on top of it as I had planned. Okay, so that was what I had to say. And did you want to talk about the SCBA conference a little bit?
Sure. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the Soto Zen Buddhist Association conference that we went to on Thursday and Friday. If you don't care about this, we will not be offended if you go away. If you do go away, please have a good rest of your afternoon. And if you're interested, stick around. We had the Soto Zen Buddhist Association is a national association of Soto Zen priests. There are 2 levels of it. One is called a full membership, which are people who have Dharma transmission, and associate members who are people who do not have a Dharma transmission but have received priest ordination. And Ryuki, who is on here, sitting in an empty room. Ryuki was at part of the conference as an associate member. Jaku and I were there as full members. And yeah, Vicki, you originally brought this up, so maybe you have some questions or something you'd like to know about.
Well, you made a reference in your talk about, it sounded like things came up about examining the issues about racial justice in light of what does it mean to be a Zen community, and how do we practice with that? So that's what I was curious about.
So there's a major theme of the conference. So this particular group of Soto Zen priests is all over North America, and a variety of lineages and types of training. And one of the things that happens at these conferences happen every 2 years is to try and address some aspect of our lives as priests that seems most compelling. And so the theme was love and resilience. And Ayo Yatunde, I don't know if any of you know her or not. She's a really, she just did a marvelous job, African-American Buddhist practitioner and professor at United Theological Union. She just did a really brilliant job of talking to us about the things that we needed to consider in connections with the Dharma. And then there was some different groups that you could join during the course of the conference to reflect on your particular intersectionality, shall we say. Another part of the conference was a presentation by Jisho Sarah Siebert, who has done a lot of work on domestic violence and gender-based violence around the world, but in particular in Haiti. And then there were other dimensions of the conference, but I would say awareness of oppression and violence and delusion in its many forms was a primary part of the conference.
Follow-up. I have a follow-up. So was there anything in particular? I know for me right now, I'm really immersed in more education about anti-racism and the origins of racist ideology going back hundreds and hundreds of years. I'm just wondering, and so I'm learning a lot right now. I'm wondering if there's anything that kind of stood out from you that it was just like, oh, that's something I hadn't considered before. Aside from the O.J. Simpson one, which I really appreciated, Shinshu, because I remember having that same conflict myself and having a hard time when the verdict was announced, kind of holding both those positions. So
You know, the thing that Io said that I found really heartening as a person in a white body is that she said, we all have to work together. We have to work together. And she also said, which was very encouraging, because I always, I'm always afraid of having the response being, you're white, get out of my life. And and she also said, and I thought this brought up a huge conversation, which was, she said, you ought to go and join a Bible study group at a Black liberation theology church. And that,
She also said, go as a priest.
Yeah.
And just go.
But mainly go in your white body and go there and, be willing to be quiet, sit there and learn and be uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And, and she said, you get in touch with the pastor and say, I would like to do this, and is that okay? And et cetera. But she was saying, we need to go beyond. So Vicki, I think it's really good you're studying all this stuff. She said, we also need to go beyond this studying and go and actually be with each other and go through all the difficulties of making this commitment to each other as, people in these different colored bodies to get together and kind of work it out. Because as she's right, we all need each other. Yeah. I mean, that so struck a chord from a Buddhist perspective. Yeah. We can't reject anything or anyone. And so, yeah.
So maybe we need a little sister communion with a Progressive Baptist church downtown.
Or not.
We don't have a lot, pardon me?
Or not progressive.
Well, I think that's what it's called. I think that's the label of the church. I could be wrong, but that one I think it's on Church Street.
So the other thing one of the things that she started with is she said she rarely accepts invitations to speak. And the reason that she accepted this invitation to speak was because she felt that as a national organization, Soto Zen Buddhism had a lot of power.
Hmm.
And that was very positive. She also said, I'm not here to perform. I'm here as a human being. I'm just going to talk with you.
Right.
I'm not going to give a keynote.
Right.
And it just opened up a conversation in a way that was, it was very powerful and beautiful.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Good.
And she has a book coming out in October, and she's also written a whole lot of really interesting stuff. And she's a wonderful professor, and so I encourage all of you to look into her work.
Could you say her name again? Since it's an African.
She's African American. I don't know the origin of her last name, but it's her first name is Ayo, and her second name is Yetunde. I believe that's the
And where does she teach?
She teaches at United Theological Seminary in, I think it's I know it's in Minnesota. I think it's in Minneapolis. It's a Christian seminary.
Yeah, so you could just look that up and she'd probably be on the faculty list.
Yeah, and they have some of her writings there too. But she has a book coming out. I think it's an edited book, but it's coming out, I think, next month.
Thank you.
So personally, I thought, I was thinking about getting more involved in the Center for Nonviolence. Anyway, to get out there and find out more. And so, yeah, because I'm very inspired by the notion that we are all in this together, and we do need each other and support each other and find out about each other and not silo ourselves. And and how important that is. And not to make it a project either. It's not a project. It's a koan, a gentle, curious, spacious koan.
Any other questions or thoughts on this? There's a new president of the SCBA, seems like a wonderful woman. Various other groups happened. It was, the one thing about the conference was nobody seemed to have told them about Zoom fatigue. So
too much Zoom,
it was
almost no breaks.
It was crazy.
Yeah.
I bailed out a couple times.
So Ryuki-san, do you have any comments? I know you were there for a little while. Look at that. Your internet is a little scratchy.
Is it? Sorry. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good. Well, the thing that I found interesting, I've been on the Diversity, Equity, Inclusivity, and Accessibility Committee for the past couple of years. So we were kind of immersed in all this before George Floyd happened. And so there's a lot of background that we sank into, and then George Floyd happened. So I've been looking at things that were talked about in the conference, but kind of beyond that. And I wanted to recommend something to folks along those lines. And it's along the lines of, you can only see as far as your eye of practice allows. There's a great series on CNN with a guy named W. Kamau Bell.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
It's called United Shades.
Yeah.
United Shades of America on Sunday night.
Yeah, I think it's available online, but we were talking about the issue of reparations because the SCBA, our committee, offered an Unpacking Whiteness training earlier in the year. And the person who facilitated it donated her fee as reparations to several groups. And there was some solace about that, some concern. And what I learned about reparations, as far as my practice can see, is there's no great consensus on what that means, even within communities of color. There are actually communities of color who have an idea about people who immigrated here after slavery and are of color do not deserve to take part in reparations. I found that very interesting. So it's yet another example of, oh, I have an idea about what this looks like. And no, not at all. I'm a white person bringing my idea of what reparations should look like to a discussion that I have no knowledge about. And along those lines, we also learned like renaming the Edmund Pettus Bridge for John Lewis. That sounds like, you know, who could disagree with that? However, there were a number of civil rights activists on that bridge that day with John Lewis, some of whom were women, some of whom lost their lives. Why shouldn't the bridge be named for them? So this has been an interesting practice. I originally joined that committee to see what equity would look like in a hierarchical practice. We never addressed that. We didn't have time. So maybe another year or so for that.
I think, you know, that.
That's all.
Thank you, Ryuki.
Yeah, thank you.
for giving that perspective, and also for reminding us about Kamal Bell's work, which is brilliant.
So I've been thinking about this as a person who's white, and I noticed that almost all of us, not everybody here, but mostly are white, and someone who's of color, if you want to chime in and educate us, you may say, goodness gracious, no, thank you. What was I going to say before I got off on that? Oh, goodness, I can't remember what I was going to say.
You've said so much.
I know. Maybe I should shut up.
No. I'm just saying.
Something that Ryuki said about this, oh, I know what I was going to say. You know, like this phrase, white lives matter.
Or all lives.
All lives matter. Excuse me, all lives matter. There's this way in which, there's women's rights, and there's LGBTQ plus IA, et cetera, rights, and there's people who are in brown bodies, and there are people who are, you know, disabled, and there are people, I mean, we can just go through the list of things that need to be paid attention to. All of this needs to be paid attention to. But things arise and fall and come into our consciousness as they require a response right now. And I think that the Black Lives Matter movement, or however one wants to call this, what's happening right now, is what needs to be addressed right now. Like this is something that's super important for the mental and physical well-being of a huge number of people who are our brothers and sisters as human beings, and that they are crying out to us to say, pay attention and actually do something. So my heart is open to that, and that's what's important. And there might be something that, you know, other things can happen at the same time, and are happening at the same time. But as a nation, I think right now this is our focus, and it's a good focus.
Shinshu, one thing I've learned through all of this and being on this committee and doing this work is what you discussed with Rihanna, and it's the attitude of approaching it with curiosity. I mean, at first it's overwhelming. Oh my God, I'm in this body, and this body has been oppressing people for hundreds of years. But if you just are curious about it, that guilt slips away, and questioning enters, and answers come to you. Like, I can't save the world, but what can I do in this moment? That shifts my way of being in this world just a little bit. And maybe just that little bit turns out to be a big thing, but we may never know that.
I would add one
Thank
thing.
you.
Guilt and shame is a waste of time. We don't have time for it.
Oh. Yeah, and a big waste of energy too.
Anyway, shame is a thing. I actually want, this is something that we're going to talk about in the practice period class, or because there's a whole thing of seeing one's limitations, and anyway, we'll talk about it. But in this way, guilt and shame is a big waste of time.
So here we are, foolish human beings, making our best effort. So,
Okay,
all righty, dighty. I hope you all have a good weekend.
take care, everybody.
Thank you both. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, see you at Zazen class or next week, whatever works.
Yep,
Bye-bye.
What time are we meeting for the board?
11:45,
11.
11:30,
I thought it was 11:30. 11:30.
11:30.
Well,
Steve, do you know what time?
11:30.
11:30, okay.
we better get on.
See you then.
Bye.
See you then.
Bye, Janet. Hey, Tiffany. She's still there. Hey, there she is.
Hello, I'm
Hi,
here.
Tiffany.
How
How's
are
it
you?
going?
Pretty good. How are you?
Hi,
Good.
Tiffany.
Good, good.
I'm actually gonna leave.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Yes, okay, unmute yourself, Janet. Okay. You're still muted.
Jaku, I was going to ask you if I'm making a plan.
Jaku.
Okay, I'm coming.
All right.
Change your clothes.
I'm making a plan for the next month of things that I want to do. Do I send that plan to you, or is it just for me?
If you want to send it to me, I'd be happy to receive it. Yeah, it's mostly for you because the practice is to set up something for yourself that feels like a bit of a stretch, but not overwhelming. And then to see what happens,
Right.
See what happens.
I'm having a problem because at the end of this month, maybe, this has been canceled several times, Eric might come and change my practice. Yeah. And so I'm trying to figure out how to I'm not a consistent person, so I'm trying to pare it down to something I can do. And I'm sewing the Rakasu, so I'm making that part of it.
Yeah.
But is it that I need to plan a special time that I do that?
Well, I think that can be helpful because part of what you're doing is setting up a structure and then seeing what happens with the structure. And in some ways, it doesn't matter what the structure is.
Yeah.
But something that gives you, so you can say, I'm gonna set up a time in the 3:30 twice a week. I'm gonna sew for an hour, and then 3:30 comes and you forget, and then you say, oh, I forgot. That's interesting that I forgot. Okay, and then you might adjust it and try something else. But I would recommend that you set something up for yourself that you feel is doable. And then if Eric comes, you'll have to figure out how to adjust that. And that's interesting in and of itself. Yeah.
And he's taking the class too. So I probably I'll talk to him today about where he's structuring it too, because for me, I don't meditate every day. I only do it on Saturday. So I want to increase that, and he might do it every day. So that might be something that I can adjust. I thought maybe 3 times a week plus Saturday, but when he comes, maybe I'll adjust it that way.
Yeah. And I think this is the thing, is that if we get too fixed on something, that's too rigid. Okay. But if we don't fix something, then we have nothing to bump up against and we don't learn anything, right? So that's why it's good to take like 4 weeks or 3 weeks and then you adjust it when Eric comes. If he comes, I hope he does, that would be really nice. You say, okay, this is what I can do. and I'm going to do it. I'm going to commit to this. This is not, I'm going to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning and sit 5 hours of Zazen every day. I'm going to commit to doing Zazen 3 times a week. And if it's for 10 minutes, that's fine. And then I'm going to see what happens. And maybe I decide to bump it up a little bit, or maybe I forget, or whatever. And so then you learn something about yourself.
Right. Okay. I have one more question.
Sure.
I see an altar. I have a little Buddha on it, a flower. Anyway, but I'm wondering, when you sit Zazen, you don't sit in front of the Buddha? Like
You can.
You can.
You can if you want to.
Okay.
And that would be another thing that would be interesting. Sit facing the wall one day, sit facing the Buddha another day, see what happens.
All right. Okay. Well, I have a problem because the table that it's at, I can't really sit in front of it.
Uh-huh.
Because I have a rug that I can't place until somebody helps me take down my bed.
So whatever works.
Okay.
Just,
right.
this is where you bring the practice into your life in a way that works, and then see what happens.
Okay. I've never talked to you about this. I just have a little bit of a problem with maybe an idol. I'm not Christian, but there's something, I like the Buddha because when I look at it, it's very soothing, but I have a problem with having an idol. And
that's fine.
Anyway, I need to talk to you about that sometime,
Yeah.
but I'm very reluctant because I feel like I don't know what to say, but I will make an appointment.
You just said it though. And then we talk about it, and then we see what happens. But I think this is where you say, okay, that's one step too far for me.
Yeah.
Sitting facing the Buddha is one step too far for me.
Okay.
But I can sit facing the wall and have the Buddha in the room. What's that like? So it's all about just encountering your practice as it is and working with it. Okay? Okay, great. Good to see you, Janet. Bye-bye.
I'm trying to leave.